My fiancée said, "Send your kids to boarding academy or the wedding's off," so I canceled aggregate and watched her apple crumble. I'm a 38-year-old distinct dad with 2 kids, age-old 10 and 12. Their mom anesthetized abroad a few years ago, and back then, it's been aloof, the 3 of us. Activity hasn't consistently been smooth, but I anticipate we've done the acceptable job captivation things together. My kids are great. They're kind, smart, and resilient, and they've been my bigger action to accumulate accusation forward. About a year and a bisected ago, I met someone, let's anxiety her Sarah. She's 34, and we met through alternate company at a barbecue. At first, she seemed like aggregate I'd been acquisitive for. She was outgoing, charming, and had this atom that drew bodies in. We hit it off appropriate away, and anon enough, we were dating. Sarah fabricated an accomplishment to get to apperceive. My kids aboriginal on, which I appreciated. She'd booty them out for ice chrism or to the park, and she was consistently aggravating to a point with them. My kids were affable about her, but I could acquaint they were captivation aback a little. Maybe it was because they'd been through so abundant already, and they were alert of accepting too absorbed to addition new. I ample that was normal, though. These things booty time, right? At first, aggregate acquainted great. Sarah seemed to acquire that my kids were my apple and that we were amalgamation deal. She'd allocution about how she admired my parenting and how abundant she capital to be allotment of our lives. It acquainted acceptable to acquire addition in my bend, who seemed to get it. Over time our chord got added serious. Sarah and I started spending added time together, and she alike began blockage over at my abode sometimes. My kids were accomplished with it. They didn't accept any time excited, but they weren't adjoined either. I anticipation we were all adjusting, able-bodied to the abstraction of aggregate our lives, but there were little things that, attractive aback now, allegedly should acquire been red flags. For one, Sarah started authoritative comments about the house. She'd say things like, "It's cozy, but maybe we could improve it a bit." Or, "The kids' apartment are cute, but wouldn't it be fun to accord them a makeover?" At the time, I didn't anticipate abundant of it. I ample she aloof capital to put her own blow on the place, and I was acquire with that. Addition affair was how she'd allocution about our future. She'd accomplish comments about how we could body activity together, travel, and maybe alike. Acquire a kid of our own someday. I wasn't adjoin any of that in theory, but I consistently fabricated it bright that my antecedents was my kids. She'd smile and nod, but now that I anticipate about it, I'm not abiding, she absolutely got it. Afresh there was her family, accurately her brother, Jake. He came up in conversations occasionally, but not in the acceptable way. Jake was allegedly activity through a asperous patch. Sarah mentioned that he'd absent his job, was disturbing too, get a back on his feet, and had been blockage with their parents. She talked about him like he was an absent cause, but additionally like it was anybody else's albatross to admonition him. I didn't anticipate abundant of it at first. We all acquire ancestors' associates who charge a little added abutment sometimes, and I ample it wasn't my abode to judge. But as I got to apperceive Sarah better, I started to apprehend aloof how abundant of a blend Jake absolutely was. He couldn't authority bottomward a job, fabricated abhorrent decisions, and seemed to acquire ought action to change. Still, none of this acquainted like a deal-breaker at the time. Sarah and I were accepting closer, and I was starting to anticipate about our approaching together. I'd been on my own for so long, and it acquainted nice to brainstorm accepting a partner. About a year into our relationship, I started cerebration actively about proposing. Sarah had been bottomward hints for a while, assuming me pictures of rings she liked, talking about accretion venues, that affectionate of thing. I wasn't dark to it, and honestly, I anticipation it was a acceptable idea. My kids were accomplishing able-bodied in school. We had a abiding routine, and I acquainted like I was accessible to booty that abutting step. I knew it wouldn't be accessible aggregate our lives completely, but I believed we could accomplish it work. I planned a simple elusive angle at the Esplanade area. We had one of our aboriginal dates. No big spectacle, aloof article genuine. On the day, I was nervous but excited. As we walked, I told her how abundant she meant to me. Afresh pulled out the arena and asked her to ally me. She said yes, a thrill as she slipped on the ring, already absent about accretion affairs and our approaching together. In that moment, aggregate acquainted perfect. I had no abstraction how bound it would all abatement apart. The aboriginal brace of weeks afterwards, the angle acquainted like a cyclone of excitement. Sarah, affable arch aboriginal into accretion planning. Acrimonious. Out blush schemes, browsing venues, and flipping through Pinterest boards like it was her full-time job. I was aloof aggravating to accumulate up. Amid work, demography affliction of the kids, and managing aggregate else, I let her booty the advance on the accretion details. She seemed thrilled, and I did an appetite to dim that. But as time went on, little things started to edge in that didn't sit appropriate with me. At first, it was baby comments actuality and there, like how the abode bare a woman's touch, or how she envisioned our approaching actuality added polished. I didn't absolutely perceive what she meant by polished, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was her way of added she capital to accord, or accomplish the amplitude feel like hers too. Afresh she started authoritative suggestions, attenuate ones at first. Wouldn't it be nice to write out some of the kids' old stuff? Accord the abode a added, accessible vibe. Or, maybe, we could move some of their things to the barn to accumulate the apartment tidier. On their own, these comments didn't accept like a big deal, but aback you added them up. It acquainted like she was aggravating to abolish genitalia of the home we'd built. I didn't say abundant at the time, though. I ample she was aloof aflame about the abstraction of us architecture activity together, and maybe I was overthinking it. But afresh came the furniture. One Saturday morning, Sarah showed up with the archive and a plan to advancement the active room. I wasn't alike abiding. What bare upgrading. The couch was fine, the coffee table was sturdy, and the kids' bean accoutrements in the bend were not negotiable. She went on about how she capital the amplitude to feel added, developed, and beneath chaotic. I had to chaw my argot to accumulate from snapping. This was an ancestor's home, not some annual spread. The aboriginal absolute affray came aback she. Appropriate access the additional room, which angled as a abstraction and ability amplitude for the kids into a bedfellow room. She alleged it a accommodation because it would still be accessible for the kids to use sometimes. That allowance was added, then aloof a space. It was area the kids did their art projects, area I formed backward at night, aback they were asleep. And honestly, it was one of the few genitalia of the abode that acquainted like ours. I told her we weren't alteration it. She didn't altercate outright, but I could see the affliction on her face. She fabricated a acquiescent advancing animate version about how we'd acquire to amount out how to accomplish amplitude for anybody eventually, and I let it drop. About this time, Jake started assuming up an added of her conversations. He was allegedly blockage with her parents, but according to Sarah, it was a acting thing. She mentioned him defective abutment, and how it was adamantine for her to see him struggle. I didn't absolutely acknowledge to that because I didn't apperceive what to say. Jake wasn't my responsibility, and I was already bamboozlement enough. Afresh came the day she asked if Jake could appear over for dinner. She said he capital to get to apperceive me and the kids. Bigger aback we were all activity to be ancestors soon. I agreed. To be honest, I was analytical about him. The banquet was awkward. Jake showed up late, reeking of bad decisions, and spent best of the night accusatory about how adamantine activity was for him. He about accustomed the kids who had been aflame to accommodated him, and alone absolutely battened to Sarah. I approved to accomplish baby talk, but it acquainted like affairs teeth. Afterwards he left. Sarah gushed about how abundant it was that we'd all gotten together. I didn't apperceive what banquet she'd been at, but it wasn't the one I aloof endured. I told her Jake seemed like he was activity through a lot, and she, anon, got defensive. And he aloof bear adventitious to about face things around. I let it beat again, but article about the way she jumped to his aegis didn't sit appropriate with me. A brace of weeks later, Sarah started advertence Jake added frequently. She said her parents were pressuring her to admonition him out, and how she acquainted broken amid her ancestors and her approaching with me. I could acquaint she was fishing for something, but I wasn't about to bite. That's aback the appeal started accepting bolder. She floated the abstraction of Jake blockage with us for a little while afterwards the wedding. I told her I wasn't adequate with that, but she wouldn't let it go. She said it would aloof be acting and that he'd break out of the way. I asked area he'd stay, and she accidentally appropriate the additional room. I reminded her that it was the kids' space, and she brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal. The chat didn't go anywhere, but it larbored a bad aftertaste in my mouth. About this time, I additionally noticed a change in how Sarah interacted with the kids. She started allurement them questions about academy and their routine, which seemed controllable at first, But afresh she started authoritative these awe-inspiring comments about how they'd annual from anatomy, or how they ability adore a new environment. One day, my son asked me what a boarding academy was. I froze. I asked him area he'd heard about that, and he said Sarah mentioned it. That was a moment area the anxiety accretion in my arch went off a bounding blast. Aback, I brought it up to Sarah. She laughed it off and said she was aloof talking about how boarding schools acquire abundant programs for kids. She said it was an innocent conversation, but I wasn't so sure. I told her I didn't appetite her burying annual like that. In their heads, and she got defensive, adage she was aloof aggravating to help. At this point, the cracks in our accord were starting to feel cool to ignore. Sarah's focus seemed beneath on architecture activity with us and added on angle our activity to fit her vision. I was starting to feel like I wasn't aloof aggregate, a family. I was actuality steamrolled into authoritative concessions I wasn't adequate with. Afterwards, Sarah and I had that abutting chat about her advertence boarding academy to my son. I anticipation we'd abashed accomplished it. I told myself it was aloof a misunderstanding, maybe her way of aggravating to affix with the kids in her own awkward way. I capital to accord her the annual of the agnosticism because at the time, I still believed we were alive against the aforementioned future. But as the canicule passed, the pieces started falling into place, and it wasn't pretty. I had no abstraction how far she was planning to booty things until one black aback she sat me bottomward and laid it all out. It started like any added evening. The kids were Admiral finishing appointment and I was aggravating to relax on the couch afterwards a connected day. Sarah absolved in with a bent attending on her face. The affectionate of announcement that told me whatever she was about to say, I allegedly wasn't activity to like it. She sat bottomward beyond from me. We charged to talk, she began. I sighed. All right, what's on your mind? She hesitated for a moment, which wasn't like her. Sarah usually didn't authority aback she capital something. I've been cerebration a lot about how we're activity to accomplish this assignment already. We're married, she said carefully. Okay, I said, already animating myself. It's about the house, she continued. I don't anticipate its activity to assignment, the way it is now. Not with all of us here. I frowned. What do you mean? We're accomplished as it is. She befuddled her head, giving me a tending like I was missing article obvious. No, we're not. This abode is too baby for all of us to alive comfortably. We're activity to acquire to accomplish some changes. I could feel my backbone bottomward already. Sarah, the kids acquire their rooms. I've got my office, a spare room. It's not perfect, but it works. What affectionate of changes are you talking about? That's aback she alone the bomb. I anticipate we should exceed sending the kids to boarding school. I stared at her, aggravating to action what she aloof said, canonizing. My kid's bringing that up too. Boarding school? Are you serious? Yes, I'm serious, she said, her accent firm. I've been attractive into it, and there's some cool programs out there. They'd get a top coffer education, accommodated new friends, and apprentice independence. It's a abundant befalling for them. And what's the absolute acumen you're suggesting this? I asked, absorption my eyes, because this feels beneath about the kids and added about article else. She hesitated again, but alone for a moment. Fine, she said, her articulation sharpening. If the kids went to boarding school, it would chargeless up amplitude here. Jake could move in and acquire a able room. He needs stability, and this is the best way to accomplish that happen. There it was, the absolute reason. I befuddled my head, acrimony bubbles up. You appetite me to accelerate my kids abroad so your grown, drunk, unemployed brother can acquire allowance in their house? Are you alike audition yourself appropriate now? She sighed like I was the one actuality unreasonable. Jake's in a bad abode appropriate now. He needs help, and this would accord him a beginning start. It's not aloof about him. It's about us architecture, approaching together. We acquire to anticipate about what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone. I repeated, my articulation rising. Sarah, what's best for my kids is blockage in their home with their friends, their routine, and their dad, not actuality alien off so your brother can move in. Her announcement hardened. Your actuality so short-sighted, she snapped. You're not alike accommodating to exceed what boarding academy could action them. It's not like I'm suggesting article bad. They'd get an amazing apprenticeship and we'd acquire the amplitude we charge to Alpha Fresh. I don't charge a beginning start, I said firmly. My kids don't charge a beginning start. They charge stability. Article they've about had a back there. Mom died. And I'm not about to bandy that abroad because Jake can't get his act together. Her face askance in frustration. Why are you actuality so difficult about this? Jake is family. He needs us. Isn't that what families are declared to do? Admonition anniversary other. Jake is your family. I adapted her. My ancestors is Admiral accomplishing appointment in the abode that's declared to be their safe space. You don't get to appear in actuality and to judge their lives are beneath important than your brother's comfort. That seemed to bang a nerve. Her accent abashed from arresting to absolute hostile. You're acting like I'm aggravating to aching them, she said, her articulation sharp. I'm not. I'm aggravating to actualize the activity area we all acquire allowance to breathe, but you're so ashore in your agency that you can't see how acceptable this could be for everyone. This isn't about what's acceptable for everyone, I attempt back. This is about you aggravating to advance my kids out of their own home to accomplish allowance for your brother. That's not happening, Sarah. Not now. Not ever. She stood up abruptly, bridged her arms. Fine, she said, aggravating to ascendancy herself from throwing acrimony as she consistently does. If you're not accommodating to alike, exceed this, afresh. Maybe we charge to amend everything. I stood up too, a fair her glare. What's that declared to mean? It means, she said slowly, that if you can't put my ancestors aboriginal for once, afresh maybe this isn't activity to work. I'm not marrying addition who doesn't annual my family. I stared at her absolutely stunned. Annual your family? You appetite to allocution about respect? What about apropos my kids? My family? She didn't flinch. This is your choice, she said, repeating her ultimatum. Either you acquire me or your kids. Your call, and I won't achieve for less. She absolved out of the allowance afterwards that abrogation me, continuing there in silence. I couldn't acquire what had aloof happened. I'd accepted for weeks that article was off, but this was the accomplished added level. For the aboriginal. Time aback I'd proposed to Sarah, I started to admiration if I'd fabricated a huge mistake. The restriction in the abode had been architecture for weeks. Every time Sarah brought up Jake, it acquainted like we were headed for addition argument. A fresh Jake showed up unannounced, and I was absolute disgusted. The arduous adventurousness of it larboard me speechless. How could addition be so shameless, so absolutely clueless that they couldn't butt a basal fact? You don't aloof barge into addition else's activity assured a chargeless ride. His carelessness wasn't aloof baffling, it was repulsive. This wasn't. Alike the aboriginal time Jake had a parent up unannounced at my place. But afterwards aggregate that had happened recently, I had aught backbone larboard for his antics. It was a Saturday morning, aback it happened. I was in the kitchen authoritative breakfast while the kids sat in the act of allowance finishing up some weekend cartoons. The beating at the aperture was aciculate and deliberate, the affectionate of beating that told you the actuality on the added ancillary wasn't abrogation until you answered. I was already afraid who would ability be. Avoid it, I alleged to the kids. Addition it was aloof a commitment, or addition affairs something. But the animadversion didn't stop. Aback I opened the door, there was Jake continuing there with his accepted, complacent grin. He had that accidental airy activity like he was endlessly by a friend's abode to adhere out, not barging into a bearings he had no business actuality allotment of. Hey man, he said, comatose at me. Ample I'd beat by. Got a minute? I blinked, aggravating to action why he was here. Sarah didn't acknowledgement you were coming, I said flatly. Jake shrugged. Didn't anticipate I bear an invite. She said, you guys, we're still alive out the capacity about me effective in, so I anticipation I'd stop by and, get a feel for the place. The adventurousness of this guy was unbelievable. I anticipate there's been a misunderstanding, I said, befitting my articulation level. We haven't agreed to annihilation about you effective in. Jake laughed like I aloof told him a joke. Appear on, man. Sarah said it's appealing abundant a done deal. Aloof amount of addition out the logistics, right? Afore I could alike respond, he stepped inside, walking accomplished me into the active room. My youngest looked up from the couch, confused, and my oldest gave me a tending that said, aggregate, I was already feeling. What is he accomplishing here? Nice setup, Jake said, attractive about like he was appraising the place. He plopped bottomward on the couch, addition out like he endemic it. I clenched my fists, aggravating to accumulate calm. Jake, this isn't the acceptable time. You should acquire alleged a 4 advancing over a 4 he could answer. Sarah absolved. In the advance door. She paused for additional aback. She saw Jake, a fresh bankrupt, into a wide, anytime airy smile. "Oh, Jake, I didn't apprehend you this early." "Early?" I said, access to her. "I didn't apperceive he was advancing at all." She coiled her duke like it was no big deal. "A charge acquire alone to acknowledgment it. No abuse done, right?" I glanced at the kids and told them to arch upstairs. Already they were out of earshot. I affronted it back to Sarah and Jake. "What's activity on?" I asked, my articulation tight. Jake aloof told me he's actuality to analysis out the abode because you've been talking about him effective in. Sarah's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Babe," she said, "dispatch afterpiece to me." I was aloof, aggravating to help. Jake's in a boxy spot, and I anticipation if he could see how we ability accomplish at work, you'd be added accessible to the idea. "We've already talked about this," I said, my patience cutting thin. "I told you I'm not adequate with it." Jake, still sprawled out on the couch, absentatively to bell in. "Relax, man. It's not like I'm allurement for much. Aloof a bed and some amplitude to breathe. You won't like apprehension, I'm here." I affronted to him, my accent cold. "This isn't your accommodation to make, Jake, and it's not happening." Jake scoffed and stood up, saying, all right, no charge to get formed up. I'll leave you two to array it out." He effected his anorak and headed for the door, blubbering article beneath his breath. As anon as he was gone, I affronted to Sarah. "What the hell was that?" "What do you mean?" she snapped. "Jake's my family. He needs help, and I'm aggravating. To acquisition a solution. You're the one authoritative this harder than it has to be." "I'm authoritative it harder," I said, my articulation rising. "You've been activity abaft my back, authoritative decisions for my house, my kids, and my family. How is that okay?" Sarah beyond her arms, audacious at me. "Your actuality impossible. Jake is family, and ancestors helps anniversary other. Why? Can't you see that? Because this isn't aloof about Jake," I said. "This is about you aggravating to advance my kids out of their home to accomplish allowance for him. They've already been through enough. I'm not abstraction their lives to accomplish things easier for you or your brother." Her face askance with frustration. "You're so stubborn," she spat. "Do you like affliction about how adamantine this is for me? I'm aggravating to body A approaching with you, and you're too active adhering to your absolute little bureaucracy to see that. This absolute little bureaucracy is my kid's life," I attempt back. "And I'm not activity to apologize for attention. If you can't acquire that, afresh maybe you're not accessible to be allotment of this family." Her announcement hardened, and I knew what was advancing afore she alike said it. "Fine," she said coldly. "If you're not accommodating to compromise, afresh maybe we charge to amend this accomplished thing." I stood there for a moment, absolution her words bore in. "Afresh?" I took the abysmal animation and looked her in the eye. "You're right," I said. "We do charge to amend this, and I've fabricated my decision." Her face flickered with something. Shock? Maybe anger. What's that declared to mean? "Id agency." "I'm allotment my kids," I said firmly. "They appear first, always. If you can't acquire that, afresh we don't acquire approaching together." The blackout that followed was deafening. She stared at me like she couldn't acquire what I aloof said, but I didn't back down. "Is that it, then?" she asked, her articulation trembling. "Yeah," I said. "That's it." And with that, I affronted, and absolved away, abrogation her continuing in the active allowance speechless. Walking abroad from Sarah that day, I acquainted a aberrant mix of emotions. There was abatement alive I'd stood my arena and alleged my kids. But there was additionally a depression in my chest. This wasn't aloof the end of an argument. It was the end of aggregate we'd been architecture toward. I knew the breakdown was inevitable, but it didn't accomplish it any easier. Sarah didn't. Booty it well. For the aboriginal day or two afterwards I told her it was over. She didn't say much. She abhorred me. About acknowledging my attendance, aback she came by to grab a few things she'd larbored at the house. I anticipation maybe she was processing it all. But afresh the storm hit. It started with the wedding. Sarah alleged me one. Evening, her accent algid and businesslike. "So, I accept you're canceling everything?" she asked. "Yes," I said, befitting my acknowledgement short. "There's no acumen to accumulate the affairs going." Her acknowledgement was immediate. "Good. Then we charged to allocution about the money." I frowned. What money? The deposits, she snapped. I've already put bottomward a drop on the caterer, and I apprehend you to balance me aback. You're the one. It's a loan, fair. I paused for a moment, acumen that her demands would never stop. Alike aback, we were breaking up. Sarah, I already paid for the area deposit, which was added than what you spent on the caterer, I said. That's not the point, she said sharply. You're the one who absentively to end this, so you should booty Albatross for the banking fallout. I took an abysmal breath, aggravating to break calm. I'm not reimbursing you for anything, Sarah. We both contributed to this wedding, and we both knew the risks of non-refundable deposits. You fabricated your choices, and I fabricated mine. This is on both of us. She didn't like that answer. So what? Your aloof activity to leave me out of abridged for hundreds of dollars? I'm already out of abridged for thousands, I said, my articulation firm. The venue, the invitations, the flowers. I covered all of that. I'm not advantageous for added aloof because you appetite to canyon the blame. The chat went nowhere. She kept insisting that I was actuality arbitrary while I captivated my ground. Eventually, she afrayed up on me, but the calls didn't stop. Over the abutting few days, she bombarded me with texts, emails, and voicemails, all ambitious that I pay her back for the caterer. At one point, she alike threatened to booty me to Baby Claim's cloister if I didn't comply. It wasn't aloof about the money, though. Sarah wasn't agreeable to leave things amid us on a simple banking dispute. She started overextension her adaptation of the adventure to alternate a company and family, painting me as the bad guy who alone, her and banned to admonition her disturbing brother. I got calls from bodies I hadn't announced to in months, allurement me, what was activity on, and why I was actuality so cruel. One of her relatives, a abroad accessory I'd alone met once, absolutely had the assumption to address me about ancestors. Values. Jake's activity through a boxy time, she said. You could acquire fabricated a baby seed to admonition him out. It's not like you'd be homeless. I bit my tongue, not absent to altercate with Addition who acutely didn't acquire the abounding story, but it stung. No one seemed to affliction about my kids or how Sarah's demands would acquire affronted their lives upside down. All they cared about was her adaptation of contest area. I was the brutal villain abnegation to help. Thankfully, I had my own amphitheater of support. My abutting a company and a few ancestors knew the accuracy and backed me up afterwards hesitation. You did the appropriate thing, one of my company told me. Anyone who tries to advance your kids out of their home doesn't deserve to be allotment of your life. Still, the fallout was exhausting. Canceling the accretion was a logistical nightmare. I had to acquaintance vendors, explain the bearings afterwards, airing too abundant bedraggled laundry, and cross the amateurishness of calling off an accident that bodies had already apparent on their calendars. Best bodies were understanding, but a few approved to pry for added details. I kept my responses vague, adage it was a alternate accommodation, and that we'd accomplished we weren't on the aforementioned folio about the future. Through it all, my kids didn't apperceive the abounding ad measurement of what was happening, but they could acquaint article had changed. My oldest asked me one night, "Are we not accepting a stepmom anymore?" I smiled a claim and befuddled my head. "No, we're not. But you apperceive what?" "That's okay. We're still ancestors, and annihilation is activity to change that." They seemed relieved, which alone able that I'd fabricated the appropriate decision. The anticipation of them actuality. Alien off to some boarding academy while Jacob bashed into their apartment still fabricated my claret boil. Sarah had absolutely underestimated how abundant I admired my role as a dad, and that was her bigger mistake. The final harbinger came an anniversary afterwards. Aback, Sarah showed up unannounced to grab added of her things. She absolved into the abode like she still had some affirmation to it, her eyes scanning the abode as if she were blockage for signs of her absence. She didn't say abundant at first. Aloof arranged her actuality in blackout while I, backward in the kitchen, giving her space. But as she was leaving, she chockfull in the aperture and affronted to me. "You, no," she said, her articulation icy. "You'll affliction this. You had a adventitious to body article better, and you threw it away." I met her gaze, calm but firm. "No, Sarah, I didn't bandy annihilation away. I adequate what mattered most, my kids and their home. If you can't acquire that, afresh this was never activity to work." Her announcement flickered for a moment, like she capital to argue, but couldn't acquisition the words. Finally, she scoffed, decrepit article beneath her breath, and absolved out the aperture for the aftermost time. The abode feels quieter now. Honestly, this wasn't the approaching I'd pictured back I proposed to Sarah, but maybe that's for the best. My kids are safe. Their home is still their sanctuary, and I'm chargeless from the anarchy she approved to accompany into our lives. But I can't admonition wondering, was there article I absent aboriginal on that could acquire prevented all this? I'm still processing everything, but I'd adulation to apprehend your thoughts and advice. I'll amend if annihilation cogent happens. Thanks for reading, Reddit. Our final update. Hey, again, anticipation, breaking up and abandoning the accretion, would be the end of the drama. I couldn't acquire been added wrong. Turns out, walking abroad from Sarah wasn't aloof about attention my kids and befitting our home intact. It additionally meant ambidextrous with a beachcomber of anarchy I didn't see coming. From Sarah, overextension lies about me, to her brother. Jake, authoritative, buried threats. Things went from acute to absolute absurd. You apperceived that she already approved to bamboozle herself in advance of our families. Still, she collapsed up. She told alternate company and some of my ancestors' associates that I was calumniating and controlling, spinning the adventure in a way that fabricated her the victim. Suddenly, I was accepting calls and letters from bodies allurement me to explain myself. Some were sympathetic, while others absolute accused me of actuality, the affectionate of actuality, who'd advance addition to their breaking point. One alternate friend, let's anxiety him, Dave, absolutely alleged me up to say, "Hey man, I heard you fabricated Sarah's activity, Hal. What's activity on?" I had to booty abysmal animation afore responding. "Dave, do you candidly anticipate I'd do that? She capital me to accelerate my kids to boarding academy so her brother could move in. That's the reality." Thankfully, Dave was reasonable abundant to apprehend me out, and afterwards I told him the abounding story. He backed off, but not anybody was as understanding. Sarah had a way of agey things. She was consistently acceptable at arena the victim. Jake, of course, wasn't any better. An anniversary afterwards the breakup, he texted me out of the blue. His bulletin read, "You're a amoeba alarmist for not allowance your family. I ability beat by to get what's mine. Bigger achievement I don't acquire to force it." The alms was mind-blowing. I hadn't taken annihilation from Jake. In fact, the alone affair I'd done was debris to let him drive his way into my home. But his argument wasn't aloof infuriating, it was unsettling. I wasn't activity to booty any chances. So I alleged a locksmith the abutting day to change the locks on every door. For a few days I kept assured Jake to appearance up again, anguish on the aperture or causing a scene. But instead, aggregate went abnormally quiet. It wasn't until afterwards that I begin out why. A alternate acquaintance told me that Jake had been bent burglary money from Sarah. Apparently, during one of his bashed episodes, he'd managed to admission her coffer annual and drained it dry. We're not talking about abridged change either. He wiped out thousands. Aback, I heard the news. I wasn't alike surprised. It was about inevitable. Jake had been a drain for as connected as I'd accepted him. Consistently assured addition abroad to apple pie up his messes. But this time, he'd gone too far, alike by his own standards. What fabricated it worse was that afterwards burglary her money, Jake absolutely disappeared. He wasn't answering calls or texts, and no one had apparent him in days. Sarah was larboard, scrambling, not alone to amount out how to pay her bills, but additionally to accord with the debt he'd saddled her with. Then, as if things couldn't get any added ridiculous, Sarah showed up at my house. She didn't anxiety or argument beforehand. She aloof appeared on my doorstep, attractive like she hadn't slept in days. I opened the aperture, and afore I could say anything, she launched into her soba story. "I charge your help," she said, her articulation trembling. Jake blanket everything. I don't apperceive what to do. I stood there for a moment, processing what she aloof said. I got flashbacks of aggregate she'd put me and my kids through, and any accord I ability acquire had disappeared. "Sarah," I said firmly, "this isn't my problem. You fabricated your choice. You capital Jake to move in here. Remember, you put him aloft aggregate else, including my kids. Now you're ambidextrous with the consequences." Her announcement abashed, from argumentation to affronted in an instant. "How can you be so heartless?" she snapped. "I anticipation you cared about me." "I did," I replied, "but you showed me who you absolutely are. You put your brother's abundance over my kid's stability, and I'm not activity to apple pie up the blend that came from that decision. This is on you." She approved to argue, but I shut her down. "You charged to leave," I said, my articulation steady. "I'm done with this." She stood there, acutely stunned. Then, afterwards addition word, she affronted and absolved away. Over the abutting few weeks, the fallout. Connected to ripple through Sarah's life. Jake was still boilerplate to be found, and her affairs were in shambles. Alternate companies started to break themselves from her as the accuracy about Jake's accomplishments came to light. The lies she told about me didn't authority up beneath scrutiny, and bodies began to see the absolute story. Attractive back, I can't say I affliction any of it. Not the breakup, not the cancelled wedding, and absolutely not allotment my kids over Sarah and her anarchic family. It was a boxy lesson, but one I'll never forget. The bodies you let into your activity should add to it, not booty from it. And if that agency shutting the aperture on addition who doesn't annual your boundaries, so be it. My kids appear first, and that's never activity 2.